Before today's topic, a quick disclaimer. The stories and data we share come from the states that we practice in and the experiences we personally had, which can differ greatly across our country and certainly the globe. This is not a professional advice show, so get comfy and let's discuss death.
Hello, and welcome to MortMic, a down-to-earth discussion on death and dying. I'm Jem.
And I'm Red, and this week we are we're your funeral directors. As we've mentioned time and again, death never comes to anyone at an easy-to-manage interval. Even when a prognosis is given, there's never an exact date and time that can be gleaned. So many times do I pick up the line at the funeral home and hear, "We just don't know what to do" after a death occurs. Not everyone makes pre-arrangements for themselves, which often leaves their families with not just a financial burden, but the burden of selecting funeral services without a list of wishes to go on. This week, we're hoping to clear up what to expect when you have a death in the family and walk you through all those first steps.
That was like the first thing my brother asked me when I told him that we were doing this podcast. Like right when we first started, I was like, is there anything that you have questions about death or whatever? Just give me some ideas. And he was like, if someone died in our family tomorrow, I would have no idea what to do.
And that's honestly super true for most of Americans, really.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think a lot of what you hear people regretting is they didn't have any plans. They were just kind of stumbling around, calling all of these numbers, calling all of these places. I think it's a really good idea to have a general understanding of the steps, the step-by-step process of what needs to happen if you wake up and you look to your right and someone's dead right next to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
When you're in that moment and you're grieving, you don't really want to be Googling what to do when someone dies.
Right. Definitely one of those things you want to try to get ahead of the game on.
Yeah. So we're going to go through it with you guys today. Kind of so grandma died, now what? 101 kind of thing.
So I think a good place to start is with an unexpected discovery of death. So not someone you're expecting to die at a hospital or under hospice or anything like that. So step one, don't panic.
Easier said than done, I feel like.
I believe so.
Like Red said, a lot of people die out of a hospital or a hospice setting. It's unfortunate, and usually it's pretty tragic. So when these things happen, obviously there's going to be a lot of emotions, and people all react in different ways. I've seen it all, trust me. It can be helpful if you just don't, this isn't a normal thing that happens. Don't panic. I feel terrible telling you guys this, but it's there's no better way to say it.
I mean, and even if you and your immediate family don't know what's going on, all of the emergency responders and last responders like us, we deal with this all the time. This is not unnatural. There are definitely people out there that can help you with all of this. So it's not like you're going to call someone in our fields and they're going to be like, what? She died at home? And so know that we're prepared for situations like this to help.
And then if, obviously if you are experiencing strong emotions and something is happening with your body and you can't really comprehend what's going on, it's really helpful to enlist a person that is of calmer mind, maybe another family member or a close friend. A lot of the times, and I think Red, you get the same, we get a call from a neighbor or the son-in-law or someone who's a little bit more removed from the situation saying my dad died, the whole family's here, what do we do next? I think it's really helpful for there to be a designated calm person in the situation.
So then once you have this helper or friend, if you're not able to do it yourself, the second step is always going to be calling the police after you've assessed the situation. That is the first step. If you call a funeral home or anywhere else, they're going to tell you the same. You need to call the police first.
So this would be for any death where your person is not on hospice or if they're not in the hospital. If they were in the hospital and they come home and they're not on hospice yet, you still have to call the police. So any unexpected death that happens outside of like the direct supervision of a nurse or a doctor, call the police, because that is the law.
This was not a story that happened to myself, but a coworker I used to work with. Apparently, a family had showed up to the funeral home and walk in. It's just like, hey, we had a death in the family, and she's like, okay, goes through the rigmarole, and it's like, okay, so what hospital or where are we going to bring your grandpa into our care? And they're like, oh, he's out in the van. We drove him here.
Oh no. Oh no.
So yeah, you cannot skip those first important steps.
And I bet they did that because they're like, well, we can take care of this ourselves, and grandpa was going to die anyway, so it's okay. But then so your van becomes a crime scene. Like, this is now a crime. Like, now the medical investigator has to come out. Now the ME has to come out. Like, they've just created a crime bringing their grandpa to the funeral home.
Lawless.
Oh, no. That's so awful. But I can definitely see that happen in certain areas. That's really funny. So after you call the police are probably going to show up, at least one of them, even if it's just something like, oh, my husband had a heart condition and, we woke up and he's dead one day. The police are probably still going to show up just because it's, protocol. And they're going to call someone like a death investigator or a coroner, depending on where you live. So that would be me coming to your house. And so basically the police are going to show up. They're going to ask you all their police questions as they do. And then either a coroner or a medical investigator is going to show up and they're going to ask a bunch more questions. Usually it's going to be questions about, what happened, where did you find the deceased? Did they have any medical history? Do they have any like family medical history that, would be of note? Like if there's heart disease in the family or, a history of cancer or something like this. And, once the coroner or the investigator kind of determines like what's going on, there's a few different things that can happen. If it's a natural death, like say your husband is like 65 years old and he has a history of, coronary artery disease, hypertension, blah, 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 diabetes, it is likely that he would be released directly to the funeral home because of his medical history. We kind of know that he probably either had a heart attack. There's like a 99% chance that he had a heart attack, or like any other medical thing that could have, caused his heart to stop beating. And the medical examiner at this point is comfortable to sign off the death certificate with this information and have him sent off to the funeral home. On the other hand, if it's something more suspicious, something more nefarious, like say like a drug overdose or an accident, like if a freak accident happened.
Fell down the stairs, air quotes.
Yeah, falling is a big thing, especially for older people. If an older person falls and like hits their head and then like, I don't know, 3 hours later they're dead, that would be, in a lot of counties and a lot of places, I think that would be at least an external exam, like an autopsy, to make sure that they weren't like, beat to death or something like this. It's just like stuff like this where we have to make sure that the cause of death is known and that it's, not, no one's getting away with murder. So say, there is some sort of suspicion, something bad happened, or, if it was an accident, say like, they're found at the bottom of the stairs and we don't know if they fell down. We don't know if someone pushed them down. They're going to be taken in for an autopsy. And usually the coroner or the medical examiner investigator will explain to you where they're going, what's going on. I will tell you that they cannot tell you what time they died. They can give you a rough estimate based on postmortem changes within the body, but all that CSI stuff that says that, according to the pooling of the blood and blah, 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 they died at exactly 3:04 p.m. That's not a thing.
That's just movie magic.
Yeah, it's movie magic. So they cannot tell you what time they died. They can give you maybe like a 3-hour window, 4-hour window, if things are handy dandy and perfect. And they cannot tell you the exact cause of death. That is, the coroner would be more in authority to tell you the exact cause of death because the coroner is going to be signing the death certificate. But someone like an investigator or a deputy coroner, we aren't really allowed to tell you like what the cause of death would be. But we can kind of, if we're looking at something and we kind of know and we have our experience, we can kind of tell what's going on. So anyways, the person's coming back for an autopsy. Autopsies usually happen in like a perfect world. Try to get the autopsy done within a day or two. A lot of underserved communities have a really big delay on autopsies because of the lack of staff and personnel. So I actually was just in an area where autopsies were taking like a week to get done.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I can't imagine delaying services that long. That's crazy.
So once the autopsy is done, very likely you will have the phone number of the medical examiner and you can call them. If you have any questions or if you have any concerns or like if you remembered something that you forgot to tell them, go ahead and call the medical examiner office. I think there's kind of like a fear. It's like, oh, I can't call the medical examiner. Like they're too busy or like, you know, they won't tell me anything. A lot of medical examiners will talk to family members and try to like work with them in a way that's like, you know, explaining to them what's going on. Or if they have concerns about the cause of death, maybe they can like collaborate a little bit and like, you know, address these concerns. So just feel comfortable to reach out to the medical examiner office if you have any questions at all. I think, you know, that's a disconnect. Like people don't feel comfortable doing that, but you definitely can do that.
I've honestly met some really good medical examiners with great bedside manner. So that's definitely an option.
Definitely. And so once the autopsy is done, it's pretty much the same as if someone had died at the hospital or if someone had died, under the care of like a physician. The body will be released to the funeral home and then the funeral home will take over from there.
So in medical examiner cases, who exactly is signing the death certificates and what's the whole process when it's not a hospital involved?
Right. So the medical examiner or the coroner, depending on like what your system is in your state or county, will sign a death certificate. And then that death certificate will be filed in this big, wonderful program called EDRS. I think most states run on this now. I'm not 100% sure. But basically, it's a huge electronic database where all the death certificates go and all the vital information goes. And it's shared between funeral homes and like medical examiners' offices, hospitals. So really, it's all up to the ME to get that all filled out and then pass it on to the funeral home. And then the funeral home will take care of all of the extra like stuff for you, like all the copies that you're going to need, you know, stuff like that.
So that covers the base of what to do if it's unexpected. But what if it's expected? What if your loved one is under hospice at home or in a facility or under hospital watch or even nursing homes, especially when there's like an illness involved or just end of life care, that kind of thing. So this is another situation that you should always be leaning on those that are around you to take care of you in a situation like this. So your nurses are going to be a huge benefit to your family, not only for the care that they give to your loved one before they pass, but especially after the fact. Definitely rely on your nurses for help. You can tell them your selected funeral home ahead of time. That way they can actually make the call for you when somebody passes. So it takes a little bit of that tension off of you, that all of those things are being handled behind the scenes. A lot of the first calls that we get are from like hospice nurses. I've even had some calls from police before as first calls. So definitely lean on those around you. That's literally what they're there for, is to help.
Yeah, it is really helpful to have a funeral home in mind if you know that, you know, no one likes to think about it. And we'll talk about this later. But if you have a funeral home in mind, definitely tell the nurses, tell the police if they show up. Like, you won't have to deal with it. And the process will be so much smoother for everyone.
Absolutely. Because the nurses also can give us a lot of the information that we need that we might be asking you for anyway. So that's definitely something that's helpful for us as well. Something that I like to try to make very poignant to people that are in this type of situation is to spend time with your loved one. And that seems like a no-brainer, but so many people like to call and like get things started with the funeral home. But without like any prearrangements, like set in stone prearrangements set ahead of time, I feel like this is kind of unnecessary. If you need to get the pricing, get the basics, that's fine. But like coming in to select things in the week leading up to someone's death, I think isn't always a great idea. Like we can't sign a contract with you or do cremation paperwork ahead of time. So like you might only be able to just pick out a casket and flowers. But by the time that somebody's passed away, I've had so many of those families change those things anyway. So it just seems like a lot of extra work for the family that takes them away from their loved one. Like I actually was making an imminent arrangement with a few daughters that like we were sitting down maybe 20 minutes and they got a call from the nurse that they had missed their mother's death in hospice.
Wow.
So, yeah. Which is, it's heartbreaking. And like, I had taken that call and set that appointment and I'm like, oh, I really wish they weren't coming in. They said that she's going to die in the next 24 to 48 hours. And so.
Yeah, they should be with her.
Yeah, exactly. So like all of these things, it honestly is more work for us to sit down, meet with you for 45 minutes to get that information and then have to go over it again when you come in. So it's easier for families, honestly, just to make the arrangements when it's time, instead of just like an imminent arrangement in like the week before someone's passing.
I like to have everything mapped out in front of me, so I get it, but like this time is so precious to spend with your family member. I also want to make kind of a quick point. When your family member dies in hospice, it's okay to spend time with the body. We kind of talked about this in our death positivity episode, I think. But I think it's really important to just kind of sit there and grieve as long as you need to within reason. And just to be present in that moment. You don't have to, as soon as your dad dies, you don't have to call the funeral home like within 5 minutes. Like it's okay. You know, they're not going anywhere. Obviously after a while they're going to be a little concerned about decomposition of the body, so you can't take like a day to like mourn your dad. You should call the funeral home before that, but really like an hour or so if the hospice allows it, if you know maybe you're taking care of the death at home. I think it's okay to kind of wait on calling the funeral home like the second that the death happens. Or, you know, if you do call the funeral home, just tell them, you know, can you give us like an hour or can you give us like, I don't know, some time? I think a lot of people are receptive to that. And I think it's good to have that time to be there and be in that moment.
I think so too. Because I think so many people are uncomfortable with like dead bodies, but it's like that person was just breathing 5 minutes ago. Like not much has changed. Like spend that time. That sounded weird. Of course, a lot has changed. They're dead.
I mean, like like chemically. I get where you're coming from. I was like, yeah, chemically, not much has changed.
Right.
They'll be okay for like a little while. You know, it doesn't have to be such a rush to like get everything. I feel like if there's a rush, it's like, you know, you never want to regret like, oh, I wish I spent more time, you know, saying goodbye, or like, you know, I wish I wasn't so stressed out during that moment, you know, like it's okay to just like chill sometimes.
Absolutely. And another weird situation that happened with like imminent arrangements that was awkward. Personally, not myself yet again, another funeral director that I've worked with. There was an imminent arrangement that they made and they're like, well, we want to set times, you know, and dates because we got people that need to come in from out of town and we know that he's going to die in, you know, 24 hours anyway. So they set the services and this guy, he lived past his services that the family had set. Like,
good for him. That is so funny. You could never predict when death is going to happen, guys. Like never, ever. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, honest, but also kind of like shady on the family side. Like, why are you trying to set services ahead of time? Like that's kind of cart before the horse like situation. So now that somebody has passed away, the first contact with the funeral home needs to be made. If a hospice nurse calls the funeral home for you, just wait to hear back from the funeral home. You don't need to make a double call when a situation like that happens. A lot of the times, it takes us some processing time to be able to get our transfer staff mobilized and all the information dispersed to all of our staff. So you don't want to make a secondary call and accidentally give us a first call before we're able to get that into our system. However, if a hospital tells you that they're going to call the funeral home, I don't always assume that they do. I've had situations in the past where a helpful nurse at the hospital was trying to be helpful, but maybe didn't know hospital protocol and let the family know, oh yeah, we'll call the funeral home and let them know that, grandma passed away. And I've had actual angry calls from families saying, well, why hasn't my mother been picked up? Why hasn't my loved one been picked up? And it's like, well, we never got a call from the hospital. So not all hospitals actually do that. They might just be saying that to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like hospice is very different. So I don't want to, I'm just assuming everyone knows what hospice is, but if you don't know what hospice is, it's having someone in like terminal end of life care in your house. So usually they're on hospice, means that the company is like coming to take care of them. That's the hospice company. So you're going to have a nurse that's like in charge of like coming to your house and taking care of this person. Or if you're like a medical person, maybe you can work something out that way. Anyways, there's a nurse in charge of you. So usually that's a different situation where the nurse is going to be at your house. You're going to see them taking care of like whatever needs to be taken care of, or you're going to trust them because they've been coming and they know your loved one. Hospitals are a bigger thing, and it's it's easy for things to fall through the cracks, to be honest,
especially with shift changes and all sorts of stuff like that.
So it's good to just make sure on that kind of stuff if it's just like a hospital situation.
But if you find yourself being the person that has to make the first contact with the funeral home, it's always best to call first. Do not just show up. This is like I'm putting this in here. This is a selfish request of mine. Don't just drive to the funeral home and walk in and say, all right, I demand arrangements for my loved one. Because, our days are very like strictly cordoned out for what we need to do. If it's a small funeral home that only has like 2 directors on for the day and they've already got an arrangement and a service, they might not be able to help you even. Like, I know I've had to DJ arrangements at the same time because I already had one and the family like refused not to be seen when they showed up. So we can best help when we have the ahead of time call so we can get the information we need, get the paperwork drafted up, make the calls we need to make, and get the information we need to get for you ahead of time. It even an hour, even an hour can do so much on our end to be able to prepare to meet your family. And that's only going to help your family, and it's only going to make your experience more smooth. If you make that call first, please don't show up to the funeral home. We hate walk-ins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, funeral directors aren't just sitting around like waiting for you to walk in and ask them to do things. Like,
yeah,
they got their stuff going on. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but say your loved one does have an autopsy, and this doesn't even have to be like a forensic autopsy. Say they are in the hospital for cancer, and the doctor is asking you if you want an autopsy done on them for research, for a lot of times clinical autopsies are done to like correlate treatment with like the progress of the disease. So they can better understand like, oh, we treated this person this way and this is what the cancer looked like, after they died. So, what can we do differently in the future? It's actually really kind of cool how they can like correlate things like that. And, it's why we kind of advocate for like a clinical autopsy in those kinds of situations. Anyways, a little autopsy soapbox there. But, if your loved one does have an autopsy, keep in mind that autopsy results will take up to 45 to 60 days to get like a final report done. A lot of time in forensics, toxicology, which is like determining what kind of drugs were in someone's body at the time of death, will take 6 to 8 weeks just to get like, some sort of like pending report or whatever. So it really does take quite a while for all of these like medical things to go through and for the reports to be finalized. So like I said, you can call the medical examiner, you can call your hospital. Don't be afraid to do that, but just keep in mind that sometimes you're not going to get a cause of death, or you're not going to get like the result that you want like a week after someone has died. It might take a couple months, to be honest. And
I know that this usually throws a wrench into life insurance situations because they want to know cause of death before they give out the money. Mm. But, calling the funeral home and badgering them about, are the death certificates updated yet? It's not going to change anything. Like, science only goes so fast.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm not an insurance expert, but a lot of the times the medical examiner will put pending, or, they'll put like a kind of like a preliminary cause of death, and you can use that for your insurance documents and all of this stuff. I think there's obviously this is a common thing, so there's ways to go about doing this.
So the next step after you have called the funeral home or have made arrangements on the phone to come in today, the next day, whatever have you, this is kind of like a little go-to list of things you should be prepared for. The funeral home should go through these things with you, but just so you're kind of getting a little heads up here. Like I had mentioned, they're most likely going to be asking you for preliminary information over the phone. So like things like vital statistics, so where someone lived, their social security, stuff like that. That'll help them generate the death certificate. And honestly, a lot of our paperwork will ask for those things too. Other things to consider bringing in would be a photo for like an obituary, or photos if you would like the funeral home to make a video, some type of tribute to be played at a service. You're definitely oh my God. You're definitely going to want to bring in clothing. It could be all, depending on the services that you want to have. It might not necessitate clothes if you're just doing like a simple cremation, but I know for some people it actually puts them at ease knowing that their loved one was cremated in clothing that they were comfortable in, instead of just like an open butt flap hospital gown.
Yeah.
And yes, we do dress in full, so you have to bring pants. Just because you can't see what's underneath the foot cap of the casket does not mean that they cannot have pants going to get buried. Underclothing.
Y'all put socks and shoes on too.
Yeah, honestly, if you bring it's not like we just toss them in the trash. Like if you bring us clothes, we are going to dress your loved one in them. Underclothes are important as well. So, undies, underoos, and especially in situations where there's like autopsies or a lot of heavy bruising from IVs and things, it's a good idea to bring high collars, high neck, like no V-neck things, and like long sleeves, just to kind of cover those types of things up. Other documents that are important to bring would be if you are using a life insurance policy for the funeral home to make a claim against for the funeral contract, you bring in the life insurance company and the life insurance number for the policy, and know who the beneficiaries are. Not a lot of life insurance companies will allow funeral homes to call in and ask for that information because we're not the beneficiary. So it's very important for you to give us that information. DD-214, or the military discharge paperwork, honorable discharge, is another thing to bring in that allows us to get military honors and a flag for your loved one. And power of attorney paperwork may be necessary to bring in if the power of attorney is held over a living next of kin. So say a husband dies, the wife would be the next of kin, but she has advanced dementia and really isn't able to make decisions. You would have to bring in that power of attorney paperwork to say, okay, well, she can't make these arrangements and sign for things. Now the next of kin would be the children or whatever have you. The last few things to consider bringing in would be a payment method. I often sit down with people that are like, I forgot the checkbook at home or whatever have you. So bring in your method of payment. And then the kind of a last, not so important, but can be helpful thing would be names for the obituary, because the funeral home is going to help you write it. But spelling is obviously very important. And a lot of younger folks have very interesting spellings to their names now. So it is always a good idea to look those up ahead of time.
Younger folks? How old are you?
Listen, I didn't name my kid Kaylee with a silent GH in it, all right?
That's so funny. And I did just want to ask, so I remember in mortuary science school, they hit on this so hard for some reason, but I don't know why. In terms of obtaining vital information from the next of kin, do you need to know the decedent's, the maternal maiden name? Do you need to know the decedent's mother's maiden name for the death certificate?
Absolutely. We need to know so many maiden names. We need to know the maiden name of the deceased if that person had a maiden name. We need to know the maiden name of a spouse. We need to know the maiden name of the mother of the deceased. So lots of maiden names, good things to know if you need to find it. It's on a birth certificate.
Mm-hmm.
Things that aren't important to bring would be prearrangement paperwork. Most of the time, I mean, like 99.9% of the time, the funeral home can just pull the prearrangements. They have their own copies, so you don't need to dig around and find it. And like cemetery information, because we will call the cemetery, let them know the name, and they can look up things on their end. So I've had families like bring in like contracts from the cemetery, and they're like, so what does this mean? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't work at that cemetery, so I'm just going to call them.
Oh, that's so nice. But yeah. Yeah.
One more important thing to do, especially, after someone passes, a lot of times families are gathered together. So a really good thing to do during a time like that when everyone is present is to just talk about what you want to do for your loved one's celebrations of life. Don't wait until you get into the funeral home the next day to do it, because that ends up being like an hour-long conversation where people aren't really getting anything done. They're just kind of going back and forth. I've actually had to end arrangements because the family just didn't know what they wanted. I don't know what they expected to get done when they came, not knowing what kind of services they wanted. So take that time when you're together to actually talk it over a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And that's important too. I just wanted to say, like, if you, I don't know, I had like a life insurance policy when I was employed somewhere, but like no one in my family knew about it. So I feel like, these are questions that you should figure out like before the death of a person, especially if it's an expected death. Like, get all that stuff together before they die, or with your family. Like, do they have life insurance? Where is the birth certificate? Like, all this stuff is stuff you want to get like arranged before the death, because once the death happens, like, it's debatable whether you're going to be there or not, present enough to make all these decisions.
Absolutely. I've actually had families bring in like the binder, TM, like where their loved one, even though they didn't prearrange, they got everything together in a binder, like the huge like 2-inch binder of stuff that you would need to make funeral arrangements. Like these real organized families. That's crazy.
So great.
One last side note on this. It's usually best not to call churches and like get things scheduled ahead of time before the arrangement conference without the funeral director being involved, because you don't know what type of schedule the funeral home is able to accommodate, if they have a visitation time that would coincide with your selected day, or is the cemetery even open that day? So it's always best to just, if you have contact information for your clergy, you can go ahead and just bring that with you to the funeral home, and we'll take care of getting all of those things scheduled. That is literally our job, is to create these services. So we call churches, we call cemeteries, we do all of that.
Yeah, let them do their jobs for you.
You're literally paying us to do this, so you might as well take advantage of it.
Let them do it. Speaking of crazy arrangements, though, I know there's some like, do's and do nots of the arrangement conference. And honestly, I know a lot of people have never been to an arrangement conference. So I think Red has some tips for us here.
Yep. There's actually a factoid that I heard somewhere, sometime, probably read it in a magazine somewhere, that the average person actually makes only 2 arrangements, like directly in their life, like not just attends, but like makes arrangements. So this isn't something that a lot of people are well practiced on. So good things to know for the arrangement conference itself. As a personal favor to us, do not bring your entire clan with you. It is very difficult to get anything done when you have like 3 generations of people in one room. And it's just like, okay, I like this poem. Everyone in the room go around and read it and make sure this is the right one. It's just like, okay, there's literally no one in the entire world has time for that. Not even the people that are coming to make the arrangements. So it's easier to stay focused.
There is never a time in the world where like 8 people are going to agree on one thing. Like never will this happen.
Very true. Very, very true. So bring your like most core decision makers. And especially if you talked about stuff ahead of time, you don't need to bring everybody. So it'll be a lot easier for you to focus and for us to be able to get things done with you if it's kept to a minimum. You can expect to be at the funeral home anywhere from like an hour to 2 hours, pretty typically, guarding any kind of crazy requests or difficult services. So don't be setting appointments like after the fact until you know for sure that you're going to be done, just so you're not feeling rushed through the arrangement. And I'm sorry, I feel bad. Like I feel like this entire section is like don't do's instead of do's, like things that I've seen.
It's helpful though. Yeah, I think it's helpful. Learn from the what is it? What's the saying? Learn from the worst. I don't know.
Am I the worst?
No, I'm talking about your worst arrangements.
There we go. So definitely let the arranger lead the arrangement conference. We will definitely get to that question. I promise we go through everything with you. I mean, obviously, feel free to ask your questions. It's important. There are no stupid questions. So if you have something that's in your mind, I would rather you not regret not asking it than taking a second to step off and, answer something you might think is quote unquote silly. But we definitely go through a lot of the things that you're probably going to talk to. So I've had people sit across from me and they're like, okay, so the casket that was like, whoa, slow down, bud. I don't even know your deceased loved one's name yet. But to give you an idea of what the schedule for an arrangement looks like, and obviously every arranger is different, but my order of operations is as thus. I gather vitals if I haven't on the phone already. I establish a service schedule. We go over obit information. We do merchandise selection, so casket or alternative container, vault or urn, flowers, printing, catering, DVDs, etc. We do paperwork to conclude the business portion, and then I kind of do some big picture stuff where it's like, what are you going to expect the day of services? And I usually send families home with some form of homework, something that they need to get done, the task list. So I like to go through that at the very end so it's fresh in their minds for what they need to get done.
That sounds very nice. I would like you to do all of my arrangements, Red.
I am painfully structured, and I am very inflexible on the order of operations most of the time.
I was just like listening to you list all that off, and I was like, that sounds lovely. That sounds so nice.
Which part of the brain are we? Are we left brain or right brain? Or very type A personalities in this podcast.
Oh God, I wish. Okay.
So when going through the service portion, something to keep in mind, choose visiting hours for the visitation that don't exhaust you or your elderly family members. And don't get too hung up on times that everyone can make. Focus on your immediate family first.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, no one is ever going to agree on anything and no one can ever make it to everything. Like, don't feel like you need to cater to like, your dad's like, friend from high school or whatever. Like just make it about you and your family. Like that's what's most important during this time, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And like being at the funeral home for even 4 hours for a visitation can be extremely draining, considering a lot of times you have a funeral and a burial to go to the next day. So definitely either put a break in between it so you can get something to eat, or just make it shorter and sweeter. That way people are going to come. Like they will come to the times that you have set forth. So don't feel like so many people are missing out on coming just because you set a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
As you go through things, don't get too lost in the weeds. Small details are for us to consider, not for you guys. That's why we're there. It is crazy to me what people get hung up on in the arrangement conference room. You'd think it's big stuff, right? Like, oh, what casket are we going to pick, or what dates and times are we going to do? I swear to you, like 50% of the time I will sit down with a family and they will select flowers for like an hour.
Wow. Just flowers?
Just flowers. Or printing. God. Like I've had people we have
printing.
Yeah. Like I've had people read like through all 100 of our prayers and poems. And it's just like, oh, my sweet baby Jesus.
I know, it's like a piece of paper that, most people are gonna, throw away, or, you're gonna stick it in a folder somewhere and forget about it. Like, what?
Yeah, honestly, though, I mean, you're not going to remember the flowers that you bought for your, father's funeral in 5 to 10 years. So don't get too hung up on the little things when there's so many other things that you have to worry about. I'd like to do this, like I mentioned before, I like to make a list for the families to take home of things to do. But if director is not actively writing you one, it's always nice to write yourself one as you go, because it's like The Sims. As soon as you walk through that door frame leading to the outside, you are going to forget half of the things that you just talked about.
It's a lot of information for like an hour period.
Yeah. I mean, essentially you're cramming what you would do for even a wedding down into like a 2-hour arrangement, and you get months to figure out a wedding. So it's information overload like crazy. A lot of the times after you've left the funeral home from your initial arrangement, you're probably going to have follow-up appointments somewhere else. So places like the cemetery to finalize things with them, or even buy a plot to begin with. The church, you will also most likely have to follow up with the church at some point. A lot of times they want you to get in contact with them to personalize the services a little bit more. They usually will reach out to you too. So that is something that you'd probably have on your schedule of things in the coming days or weeks before your services. And always remember through all of this, your funeral director is your liaison. We are literally here to help. Like if you're just confused, like, oh, I forgot what I was supposed to do today, call us. It's not even a big deal for either ourselves or our administrative assistants to just, hey, what did I need to do today? And we can walk you through stuff. Or, oh man, I really don't know if I can make this call right now to the church about this. Have us do it for you. Like, please lean on your funeral director. It's what we enjoy doing for our life, and we want to help people.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of the times funeral, like whenever I worked in a funeral home, and there's always this like one like widower who just calls all the time, and maybe it's a little annoying, but it's kind of endearing. Just they're like, like, oh, like I thought I was gonna bring over Patricia's clothes today, but something happened, and I was wondering if blah blah blah. I don't know, just like. You can call the funeral home like whenever you want, because I assure you there's a little old man that's calling, like blowing up their phone like 10 times more than you are. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, honestly. Especially when people get like, their life partner is gone. Like they kind of miss talking to people, I think, too. It was really bad during COVID. People were cooped up inside. They were calling us for anything under the sun.
Yeah. God, I can't imagine. But yeah, so call. If you are afraid to call, someone has called about it before, so don't worry. So a step in the process that sometimes doesn't always happen for everyone, but is definitely like a very unique experience, is the viewing of a dead body of a deceased person. If the deceased passed away, at a hospital, from an accident, unexpectedly, whatever it is, they're at the ME office, or they're at the hospital. A lot of the times, offices of decedent affairs or any sort of like medical examiner, family counselor, social worker, or admin can arrange a viewing for the family. And the reason why, some people might do this is because it's a really big step in closure, especially if the death was unexpected or kind of traumatic in a way, to see the body very close to the actual death of the person. So this is before any makeup is done, before any embalming is done, just like the person as they are. There are some places that cannot do this for you, or they don't have a policy for it, or they don't have the facilities for it. But in places where they can do this for you, it's definitely something to ask for if that is something that you feel like will help you in your grief. I will just say that it's not. Sometimes it's very, very, very difficult because the body isn't always very pleasant to look at because of like maybe the circumstances of the death, or like maybe the time that the body has been dead, or some, disease processes, what they could have done to the body. I think you just need to use your best judgment. So if you, let's say you get a call that your mom passed away and she's been dead in her house for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. I would recommend not viewing the body just because of the state of decomposition that she's most likely is in. What we tell people is that you want to remember your person like with the best memories that you have of them. If the last thing that you see of them is like this bloated like face that doesn't even look like them anymore, you're not really going to want that in your memories of them. So obviously you can do whatever you want. Like, the body is your pseudo property. Like if you want to view them, you can. We just kind of really recommend like considering things like this when going into it. And then I think back in the day and like on TV and stuff, it's really common to see like, oh, we have to view the body for identification purposes. That isn't really the case anymore because people have their IDs in their pockets, and the police can just like compare and contrast that way. That's kind of how we identify decedents these days. We also have fingerprinting. We also have dental records for identification. A lot of the times the viewing ID is not really necessary anymore. So don't expect something like that unless you get a call from the medical examiner. But like I said, a lot of medical examiners' offices, a lot of hospitals can't really accommodate the first viewing. So sometimes that transfers over to the funeral home.
And that can be a really difficult mental situation for people that maybe didn't get a chance to see their loved one at death, and their first time seeing them is going to be made up in a casket after they've been embalmed. So it's really kind of scary. I hear that a lot with a lot of families, that they've been so nervous for this day. Like, all the extra work that they had put in during the week means nothing compared to that first viewing at the funeral home. And it can be kind of a spooky thing. You don't know how they're going to look. And I think it's always okay to, if you're feeling unsure or uneasy about it, just communicate with the funeral director when you come in. Like, how does mom look? How does everything look? And they can be honest with you if maybe things aren't so good, or they can be really reassuring to let you know that, yeah, no, mom looks absolutely fantastic. You did a great job picking out clothes and casket. She looks so peaceful. I do try to do that myself to kind of ease people's anxieties as I walk them down what seems like probably the longest hallway they've ever walked, just to tell them, yeah, he was as handsome as you probably remember, or, that kind of thing. So it can be scary, but there's a lot of things that you can just ask questions, and we can definitely be honest with you.
Definitely. I think it is a really big emotional moment, is like seeing the dead body for the first time, because it's just so jarring. Like, it's very like fight or flight kind of response that we have, and that's totally natural, but I think especially having the first viewing at a funeral home is honestly, in my opinion, so much better than doing it like in a hospital viewing room, hospital viewing room, or like at the ME office or anything like this.
Yeah, it's a lot more comfortable and controlled.
Yes.
So some tips in regards to actually the visitation itself. Always nice to kind of put a personal touch on things. Bring things to set up and around the room, like knickknacks and things of your loved one, family photos. I've hung, family portraits on the wall where our art is. It's really nice to be able to have the room reflect the person that passed. And also getting like guests involved. I do my little above and beyond takeaways. So grandma, I did one the other day. I thought it was kind of cute. Grandma and grandpa loved to dance. They always went out dancing. So I printed out a few different sheets of like basic dance steps, so you could practice it with your own loved ones and kind of carry on that love of dance, or like things for people to take home. I had a kid that was super into building Legos, so I bought a bunch of loose Legos for people to like take one and think about them, keep it in their pocket. So there's all sorts of really cute things that you can do, or your funeral director can do.
That's so thoughtful. Funeral Director of the Year award, everyone.
Stop. No, go on.
Oh, please. That's so precious. But that idea is definitely something you can carry over to your own arrangement. Say if your funeral director isn't the funeral director of the year.
And some other things you might not be thinking about at the moment, but wear comfortable or appropriate shoes. Those high heel stilettos aren't going to feel so good after the first few hours. And especially if you're like sinking into the wet ground at the cemetery, you're going to be struggling. So wear some, comfy clothes and take breaks for yourself. People feel trapped in that visitation room a lot of the time with guests coming in and out. It's okay to step away for a little bit, get some air, get some water, get something to eat, and be human for a moment.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Okay, so the final soapbox that I wanted to get on with you guys during this pod today is about pre-planning and end-of-life considerations. So this is actually before everything that we talked about. Rewind a little bit. These are things that you should definitely consider beforehand, before this even is a glint in someone's eye that they're going to be passing away.
Yeah, I should be pre-planning for my death, and I'm like 27, like it's not gonna happen anytime soon, knock on wood. But yeah, it's, there's no like earlier time, like, you know, you can do it as early as you want, especially just having that like binder that we talked about, like the binder. You can have that when you're like 30, you know, because what, God forbid something happens, and then what is your partner just going to be like flapping around like a fish out of water? Like, you want to have some information for them at least, you know?
Definitely. And it starts off as something as simple as just having the talk of a lifetime. I don't care if your mom doesn't want to talk about it. You got to make her talk about it. At least get their wishes down somewhere, and, you know, start asking those inquisitive questions like, well, what do you want to do? Or start asking those inquisitive questions of just like, well, what do you want us to do to take care of you when you pass away, Mom? You know, or like, have you ever given any thought to cremation or burial? Just little things. Start that conversation.
Yeah, even like the smallest things. Like, my mom really doesn't like to talk about death at all, but I did get her to tell me that she absolutely wants a closed casket, and she wants a black casket with purple daisies.
That's gorgeous.
And I mean, like, that's like the tiniest part of the arrangement, but like, if I know that that's what she wanted, like, I feel better, like I can do something for her like that. You know what I mean?
It definitely creates connection between you and your deceased loved one, that like you're following wishes that mattered to them.
Yeah. So even like something small like that, you don't have to hammer out like, where's your life insurance policy? But like, you know, just like something like anything nice like that, you know, that makes it more comfortable for everyone.
And it's important to get a will in order, of course, ahead of time. But when it comes to actually someone passing away, the will is really only important for like financial type things or assets. But the disposition that is on a will, like if Grandpa put, oh, I want to be cremated in his will, it's not enforced in many states. So even with prearrangements, they can be changed with like the next of kin's wishes at the time of need. So make sure you make good with your representative that's going to be taking care of your funeral arrangements, because a lot of the times they can be changed. There's nothing that locks you into those things just because you set it on paper.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing we always hammer home is like getting a funeral representative. If you don't think your next of kin is going to carry out your wishes, there are documents you can fill out to make sure that someone who cares about you will take care of you when you die.
And it is literally the easiest paperwork you will ever do. A lot of times they're like 2 to 4 pages, super small. You and that person sign it, you have it notarized, you call it a day. It's very simple. And
you're legal, good to go.
And the final statement, pre-plan for the love of God. Like, just do it. Even if you go into the funeral home and just do what's called an info-only file, where you pick what you want, you write it down, you get a quote, you don't pay anything on it. At least it's something for your next of kin to go off of. At least your family knows what you wanted. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by all the information that we just gave you, imagine how overwhelmed you'd feel at your first arrangement that you ever had to make. So hopefully this was at least a little bit helpful to kind of give you an idea of where to start and to kind of push you in the right direction of writing down your wishes and talking to your family and creating open conversations about death.
I think the most important thing to remember too is that like you are not alone, and you're not the only person in the world that's ever gone through this. So definitely be sure to lean on those around you. Trust in your funeral director, your funeral representative. Be able to reach out to, hospice and hospitals and the ME office if you need to. All these people are here to help you. So you really don't have to do this alone. Like, it's going to be okay.
And that's all for this week on MortMic. We'd love to connect with you guys on our socials, so like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at MortMic Podcast. It would mean a lot to hear your feedback, so tell us what you think in a comment and drop us a rating on whatever podcast hosting site that you might use. If you have any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear about or burning questions you might have about death, shoot us an email at mortmicpodcast@gmail.com.
I also want to give a huge thank you to our friend Marcin for the use of his song titled Deputies of Death, which he produced just for our show. You can check out his Bandcamp at marcinmusic.bandcamp.com. Thanks, Marcin.
And be sure to tune in the first Thursday of every month for more casual discussions on death. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been MortMic.
Bye.
Bye.